Hello, and welcome back to another video from Fantasy Football Forever. Today, I would like to talk about something called the Paradox of Unanimity and how that applies to Saquon Barkley. Derek Abbott, a physicist and electronic engineer at the University of Adelaide in Australia, talks in a TED Talk about the idea of the Paradox of Unanimity. The idea behind it is that if every single person agrees on a matter of opinion, there has to be a flaw in the system. So first he takes one example, which is not a matter of opinion. Imagine there were a police lineup, and in that lineup, you had 4 bananas and 1 apple. And every witness was told to identify the apple. You would expect everyone to identify the apple correctly. There's no opinion there. One is an apple, one is a banana. On the other hand, his research has shown that if you have a lineup of suspects and every single witness picks the same suspect, then odds are that there is a flaw in the lineup, that there is a bias that exists. One example of the paradox of unity came up between the 15 years of 1993 and 2008, where police in Europe found the same female DNA sample in 15 different crime scenes across France, Germany, and Austria. And this mysterious killer has famously been dubbed the Phantom of Heilbronn. She was never found. The DNA evidence was overwhelming and was consistent, but ultimately it was proved to be wrong. It turns out that there was a systemic error, that one of the cotton swabs used to collect the DNA samples, were accidentally contaminated, all by the same lady in the factory that made the swabs. In other words, having every single case be 100% consistent and unanimous meant that there had to be an error. Put it more bluntly, take a survey of 100 people about an opinion. We aren't going to get 100 people to agree unless there's something flawed in the question. When we talk about the paradox of unanimity in fantasy football, the word that we often use is groupthink, right? People tend to agree with the group. If we have an opinion which a lot of people share, our inclination is not to want to be different, not to want to stick our neck out. Our inclination is to follow along with what the group says. This is groupthink. This is the paradox of unanimity. The more people that agree, the more likely it is not that the consensus is right, but rather that there is a flaw in the thinking. My prime example of the paradox of unanimity in fantasy football applies to Saquon Barkley. Coming into this year, everyone acknowledged that Saquon Barkley was either the number 1 or the number 2 running back. In Dynasty, it's unequivocal that he is a top 2 running back coming into this year. And even if you look at Dynasty top 10 rankings, factoring in Saquon Barkley's injury, he's still a top 2 or top 3 running back in almost every single Dynasty ranking. To me, this is the epitome of the paradox of unanimity. I'm saying it right now. Saquon Barkley is not a top 10 Dynasty running back. That's correct. If we were redrafting a Dynasty League starting over from the get-go beginning in week 5 of 2020, Saquon Barkley would not be one of the first 10 running backs whom I would choose. And there's a great flaw in Saquon Barkley's game that will drag down his career and bring him outside the top 10. If we look back at historically productive running backs, we can look at guys like LaDainian Tomlinson, like Adrian Peterson, like Saquon Barkley. elite talents who, when they are on the field, are going to put up the proverbial generational numbers. But here's the difference. Tomlinson did not miss games. Frank Gore does not miss games. Saquon Barkley is going to miss many, many games over his career. The nature of how he runs, the nature of how he cuts, the nature of how he jumps, the nature of how he lands is going to expose him to hit after hit after hit. His career will be a little bit more like A.J. Green's. When you put together a full season or even 12, 13 games, they are going to be elite numbers. And if you could guarantee that A.J. Green would have 15 or 16 game seasons every week in his career, he would have been the number one dynasty wide receiver for about a decade. That has not been the case with A.J. Green, and that I do not believe will be the case with Saquon Barkley. He's going to miss games every year. He's going to miss parts, potentially even all of seasons. Saquon Barkley is the prime example of the paradox of unanimity. Coming into this 2020 football season, I had Saquon Barkley in 2 effective keeper dynasty leagues. In the preseason, I sold him off, traded him for what was probably a bit of an undersell. In the other, my co-owner, Jeremy McKenna, and I determined before the season that Saquon Barkley was a big sell for us. We wanted to trade him away. Unfortunately, he got hurt before we were able to do that, and we undersold when we traded him relative to his value before the injury. I share this with you because if you have Saquon Barkley on a dynasty team and you can get 90, 95%, even potentially 85% of the value that he had coming into the season, I think you should do it. He's never going to reclaim his status as a perennial top 2 running back because he will continue to be injured and injured. Even if you disagree with me about Saquon Barkley, that's okay. Still learn the lesson of the paradox of unanimity. Just because every expert, every ranker, every YouTuber like me, even if all of us say the same thing, the more people who shout the same thing, the more likely it is that there is a flaw in the thinking or in the system that we're all missing. So think for yourselves, reach out of the proverbial box, find your own beliefs, do your own player evaluations, and when you differ about a player on whom everyone else agrees, that is your invitation to capitalize. Trade that player away if you have him, if you think he's overranked. Trade for that player if you think everyone else is dismissing him too early. We're all here to give you advice, but you're going to lead your teams remembering the paradox of unanimity. Thank you again for joining in for this video from Fantasy Football Forever. Please, if you want to like this video, please also subscribe and do me one more favor and share this YouTube channel. Get other people on the email list. The more of all this we have, the more of these videos I will be able to put out. Have a wonderful day and good luck in week 5.